Hi there, this is Mr. Evans. As part of our look at the external economic environment of a business, we need to have a look at globalisation, and that's what I'm going to cover in this video, looking at the reasons for greater globalisation of business and the importance of globalisation for business. Okay, and again, of course, we're considering this in the context of the opportunities and threats presented by business in terms of globalisation. So first of all, what is globalisation? Globalisation is a process. It's been going on for thousands of years, really, by which the world's economy have become increasingly integrated and interdependent. Okay, independent is when you're on your own. Interdependent means that you rely on someone else. And globalisation is the process by which countries are becoming more dependent on each other, particularly in the regions of kind of trade. We rely on other countries to provide our needs, particularly in the UK. We trade a lot. You know, you think of all of the food, all of the clothes. If you just have a look at the products that, you know, the clothes that you're wearing, the food that you eat, have a look at all the labels, where it comes from. It's all over the world. So the world economy, as I say, over thousands of years, you know, the ancient Silk Road connecting China and Europe is an example of this. The evidence that globalisation is occurring is that there's more international trade, and the proportion of a country's trade that is accounted for by imports and exports has gone up as well. So there's a lot more international trade going on. The proliferation of global brands, McDonald's, Starbucks, Nike, all of these are global brands, all of the car brands, the computer brands. There's far more of them today than there were 10, 20 years ago. And there's been a reduction in the amount of protectionism, which could really be argued to be a cause, but lots of evidence that globalisation is occurring. So we need to look at some of the causes. Now this is obviously massively outdated. The most recent date on there is 2005. But you can see that you know, from 1930 to year 2000, there was huge falls in transport and communication costs. Okay, during period 1982 to 2005, you can see here what happened to the growth of multinational foreign operations. So what have been the causes of globalisation? Well, falling transport costs, as we've seen, the cost of getting your product from one country to another, or importing raw materials. Falling communications costs, so communicating with suppliers abroad, communicating with customers abroad has become much easier in recent years. And I mean, the development in both transport and communication, but particularly communication in the last sort of 10 years is just unbelievable. Technological developments like the internet, mobile phones, etc. have made it much easier for us to trade with foreign nations. Electronic payment systems. So, I mean, just the other day, I mean, I'm based in Dubai, my bank account is in the UK, and I bought a product from an American company. So, I mean, and it was instant. You know, I paid for it on my UK debit card, and the product was immediately shipped to Dubai. It's incredible. A reduction in protectionist measures have helped to lead to globalisation. Rising world incomes and living standards. There's demand now for goods that are produced overseas. We're no longer happy just eating maybe the local grains and goods produced by farmers. We want variety and choice, and that's a result of increasing world incomes. The emergence of multinational companies and global supply chains has been a huge driver of globalisation. Companies like Apple and the car companies. If you have a look at how complex it is to manufacture a car in the UK, you know, there's a huge amount of supplies that are just imported from particularly Europe, but all over the world. So there are some of the causes of globalisation. We need to look at the importance of globalisation for businesses. So I've just picked out the four main areas of a business. What am I trying to say? The functional areas. So finance, how's globalisation affected finance? Well, we've got increased revenues from our ability to sell overseas. We may have falling costs as a result of imported raw materials, I should probably say. Okay, and we've got increases in competition and the supply chain as well. Okay, of course, not all businesses have benefited. Not all businesses sell overseas and get increased revenues from that. And maybe some businesses have had their suppliers put out of business by international competition. So it's not all necessarily advantages. In terms of marketing, there's been an emergence of global brands. It's become much cheaper to kind of conduct advertising and promotional campaigns abroad, particularly in the last few years with the rise of social media. That cost has gone down dramatically. Equally, it might be good news for your company if you're engaging in this. If not, maybe your business is subject to far more international competition who have got, that maybe they're more efficient than you at using these methods, and it's damaging your company. In terms of operations, we've got falling transport costs, global supply chains. We can get our raw materials from overseas. We can ship stuff off to our customers. In terms of people, we've got reduced communication costs. It's easier to communicate with our people abroad. We send emails now. It's very cheap. It's instant. Okay, if we've got a worker working in Hong Kong, we can very cheaply send a PDF file of 40 pages that might have taken a week to get there before. So really efficient communication. And increased labour mobility as well. People are far happier now to say, I'm working abroad myself, so increased labour mobility, people going and working abroad, exchange of skills internationally. So what are the opportunities from globalisation? Well, first of all, specialisation and comparative advantage. You'll notice this is very similar to international trade. So as a business, we can find out what we're really good at as a result of globalisation. What are we much better than the French companies, the Italian companies, the Japanese companies? What are we better at them at? And we create our comparative advantage, our USP, and we exploit that by selling to those markets overseas. There's going to be increased competition and choice, lower prices, more innovation, improved quality and service. Okay, maybe that's an advantage to customers, but we can also think of that in terms of our supply chain. We're going to have economies of scale if we can take advantage and increase sales by moving abroad. We become more cost competitive. I've mentioned suppliers already. There's going to be the opportunities for international expansion, FDI abroad. On the slightly putting forward probably quite a positive view of globalisation here. On the other hand, that might mean that multinational companies look to avoid regulations, okay? Paying taxes in particular companies. They go and set up in the lowest tax-based company. They go and set up in a poor country where there's fairly lax labour laws, and maybe they don't treat their workers very well because it's cheaper to do so. So yes, these are opportunities for globalisation, but it's not necessarily ethically or morally a good choice. What about the threats from globalisation? Well, there's going to be far more competition from cheaper producers, okay? Threats to employment in a country, threats to your workers because you can't compete with people. There's going to be potentially diseconomies of scale as a result of trying to sell to people in markets overseas. Expanding your company can be difficult, and it's difficult to coordinate and manage. Adopting products for sale on international markets. We can't just sell the same product, we might need to adopt it somehow, which can increase costs. Globalisation can be hugely damaging for economies when we're suddenly subjecting our companies to international competition, and maybe our companies aren't efficient enough to compete, and it leads to unemployment. Well, what happens to me if I'm a business trying to sell to people in that area? Okay, so think of I've used the Port Talbot example before, where there's the steel works, where there's very cheap Chinese steel. What's the impact on the Port Talbot community of this huge steelworks potentially in danger of closing down. If I'm a plumber in Portugal, that's going to have a big impact on me. The increased environmental impact of transporting all these products overseas, importing all these raw materials, people going everywhere. Okay, lots of environmental damage potentially could be caused. Potentially there's the risk of bad publicity as a result of unethical CSR practices. Maybe we've purposely moved somewhere where there's lax labour laws and we don't treat our workforce as we should because it's cheaper. Maybe it's just more difficult to manage the business, and we don't want to exploit the workforce, but maybe there's things going on there that the senior management aren't aware of, which could lead to bad publicity, unethical CSR, etc. There's the cost of managing a multinational business, translating materials, trying to manage people of different cultures, all potentially costly for a business. And there's this risk of contagion. What do I mean by that? Well, the global financial crisis of 2007-2008, it started in America, but because of globalisation, our economies are so integrated and interdependent on each other. Once the American economy started to suffer, that spread to the rest of the world, and these financial crises are far more international now as a result of our interdependence. Our dependence on the American economy, their dependence on us to provide goods and services. So that's looking at opportunities and threats as a result of globalisation.